Hello, I'm Wendy. This is a painting buildings tutorial of a small coastal Welsh church. It includes tips on perspective and is painted in watercolour. This is one of the photographs of mine that we'll be working on. I'll show you another one a little bit later on in the video. The church is called the Church of the Holy Cross. It's located above the beach at Mwnt on the Ceredigion coast in West Wales. It's a beautiful place and I visited it many times. We were lucky on this day because we had some lovely sunshine, and you can see the shadows on the church here really well. This is another photograph of mine looking at the church from the front. As you can see, I really like the foreground with all the flowers and the very unusual walls there. We're not working from this view today. We're going to work from the previous photograph that I showed you, which is going to give us some more interesting perspective. I am planning on returning to this though to produce some little cards, some spring cards with the chapel and the yellow flowers in the foreground, so look out for that. If you subscribe to the channel then you won't miss that. It should be coming up in a week or two. Looking at a building from the side, as we are doing here, means that you always have to be aware of perspective, and I feel a little understanding of its rules can be a great help when you're doing your drawings. I shall try to explain my understanding and what has helped me. If you look at a building straight on, or almost straight on, then the lines you are seeing are parallel, such as the line of the roof, the line under the eaves, the line above and below the windows. These are all parallel to one another. But if you look at a building at an angle, then these lines now slope and they converge on what is called the vanishing point. I find the vanishing point is best found or estimated by extrapolating a line from the roof and extrapolating a line also from under the eaves. You can see then, if you get that vanishing point, you can test your drawing, because the windows, you can see that the tops of the windows, you're extrapolating a line to the vanishing point, and the bottom of the windows, you can see the angle that they're forming, if you like. I'm sorry, it's not that easy to explain. I am going to put a link in the description box below to a very good book that will explain all this in more detail. But if you bear with me just a little while longer, you can see how it does help as well. Knowing the vanishing point, it can help on the bell tower there to see the slope on those angles on the top there. This would also help a lot as well when you're doing the angles on the tops and the bottoms of the chimneys, for example, if you're doing a cottage. Now, if you want to have a go at painting this little chapel at this angle, then I hope that helps. Just bear that in mind when you're doing your drawing. For those of you that think it might be a little bit too much, then I do have a template available. There is a link to both the perspective drawing and to the photograph in the description box below the video. For this picture I put on a flat wash behind the church. I do have a previous video you can check out on how to lay on a flat wash. I didn't want the sky too fussy in this case, and it's not a wet into wet wash, it's just wet onto dry. It's just a question of keeping those edges really damp as you're bringing the wash down. The colours that I used for the sky in this case were cobalt blue mixed with some Payne's grey. To prevent lines forming, then keep the edges, keep a bead of paint on the edges, keep it very wet, and then load your brush and keep picking up that bead of paint. If you want to do another sky on here, clearly then it's a wet into wet wash would work really nicely, and a very simple sky, and you don't have to turn the paper upside down. It's just that I find by putting on these flat washes, I just find it easier to work that way. The light was coming from the left on this photograph, so there was going to be some shadow on the right hand side, apart from that very dark cast shadow from the roof. It was difficult to know what colour to put on there. I decided on a very light mix of ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna, very, very dilute. I did a little bit of work on the wall after this because I do like to work around a picture. I adjusted the drawing slightly by moving the wall down to give me a bit more space for the flowers and the greenery. I thought I would use a credit card on this wall. I thought it might just work very well pulling the paint down, and so I mixed up some colours using usual suspects. It must have been ultramarine, burnt sienna and a bit of light red. I put the paint on varying tones, varying colours, and thicker in some more places. This was quite experimental. I hadn't practiced this. I had no idea really how to do this wall, but I think it did work quite nicely in the end. And I switched and used a little bit of very thick card to pull out the paint. I'm not quite sure why. You'll see later in the video that I did add some more darks to the wall a little bit later on when it was dry. I very carefully painted the roof with a small brush here. It had to be really quite careful here. This is quite a tight part of the painting. I used ultramarine mixed with light red for the mix. It took quite a bit of mixing to get it as I wanted it. The photograph was showing it more on the blue side, so I went with that. But clearly, of course, depending on the light in these situations, then these colours can change, so it's not critical to get it absolutely right, but I felt I'd get it on the blue side, and again painted it very, very carefully. And don't do as I do and forget to paint the sky behind the bell here. Keep some of the sky paint so that you can match it up. I had to remix, but I think I did a pretty good job on it. It's very easy to forget. There was a bit of perspective on that cast shadow on the front of the building there. I don't usually do this, but I just penciled in where I wanted to place the shadow because I thought it could be a little bit tricky using a very soft pencil so I'd be able to rub it out. And the colours I used for the shadow again were ultramarine with maybe just a tiny touch of the Payne's grey in there. Try and put this shadow on in one go. Don't do layers of paint or it won't work. It'll just look like, quite often shadows can look like holes, black holes on a painting. They don't work very well, and it's usually because, not particularly because the paint is too dark, but because too many layers have been put on there. So try and keep the paint dark, plenty of water in it, and put one layer on there. And as you can see, I painted around the window shapes. Looking at the photograph, I painted the shadows on the bell tower. I did soften that darker shadow on the top left there just a little bit. I felt it needed it. It was just observing the photograph and trying to interpret everything, you know, that I could see there. It's quite subtle, and that little bell there I did quite carefully as well, with a very small brush and that dark mix of paint. With the same dark mix as I did the roof, I suggested the shadow side of the windows, a little line across the top and the shadow side down the left hand side, and similarly with the door. Once I'd finished the door, I wasn't that happy with that shape, and you'll see I adjusted it a little bit later on. And there was one gravestone there that you may want to miss out and just put the grass there, but I put that in, and again I just put that in with that ultramarine and burnt sienna mix. And also I just suggested the dark line on the left hand side there. It wasn't that apparent in the photograph, but I do think it helps to give that left hand side of the roof an edge there. I used the second photograph as a reference to paint the flowers on the wall. I thought it would be nice to have some more in there. I used a couple of different yellows to paint the flowers, and once they were dry I used my usual palette for the greens, which was Prussian blue with various mixes of raw sienna and burnt sienna, and I just, as you can see, I just dotted them about and I worked very loosely on this particular part of the painting, which was a bit of a relief really, because the rest of it had been very considered and quite tight. So I thought it was nice to loosen up here on the wall and the flowers. I started off the foliage using the mid-tone greens, which was the Prussian with the raw sienna and maybe a touch of the burnt sienna. And then as I was working, I gradually added more of the darks in there, as you can see. I used the darker greens to add a little bit of strength to the wall and to separate some of the bricks that were in there. And I put some extra leaves over the wall itself to break up the monotony of it as well. So it was just a very loose, intuitive sort of work I was doing down here. If you have a go at this picture, then you may want to be more considered in doing this foreground work. It all depends upon your style, doesn't it? So when everything was totally dry, I rubbed out the pencil lines, and that does make a difference, I think, to your drawing. So do make sure that you put them on very lightly when you do your initial drawing. And at this stage I did a little bit of tidying up, little bit of white gouache here and there, just to make a few minor adjustments. And as I said earlier, I just adjusted that door a little bit, made me feel a bit happier, the shape of it. I put a little bit of shadow on the right hand side of the gravestone to give it a little bit of form. Touch more shadow on the top there. And then on the right hand side I added, well, on the left hand side I put a little bit of shadow, and on the right hand side there I straightened up that wall with just a tiny little bit of the blue. I hope you found this a useful exercise in painting a building using some basic rules of perspective. I'll be working more on this subject and putting it into more of a landscape and making some cards for spring. So if you don't want to miss out on any of that, then do subscribe to my channel. You can post any work that you do on my Facebook group, and I would look forward to seeing that. Until next time, bye for now and happy painting.